I was born on October 23rd, 1936. My original name was Marietta June Oran. That was my mother's first name. But she was always called Todge for a reason that was indistinct. I was always called Retta, and nobody ever called me Marietta. Because of my date of birth, I was in kindergarten when World War II started, and we lived in the San Francisco Bay Area at that time. I mean, my parents and I. And there were air raids, and we had to have blinds on all the windows of the house or no lights on at all, because they were very much afraid of Japanese attacks, especially around the San Francisco area. Not long after that, we moved along with most of my father's brothers back to Utah, where the grandparents had come from originally, because the government was building a steel mill in south of Salt Lake City, and they needed people who could build houses, and my grandfather and all the sons were masons, bricklayers. So we spent the rest of the war in Utah, and then came back to the Bay Area a little, just about the time the war ended in 1945. I wanted to be a dress designer. And of course, finding a boyfriend that was so interesting made me think maybe there were other ways to go than learning to do something and being able to work hard enough to be able to make money at it would take all of your time. It wasn't something you could just walk into and, start doing. I lived in a dorm that first year I was there, and right across from the dorm was a men's house. And one day I got a call from the social director of this house across the street, and he told me the name, and he said he would like to take you out, and tomorrow afternoon about 3 o'clock. And I thought, well, that sounds pretty safe, And I made a mistake, because I thought that the social director told me the name of another student who was a big man on campus. And I thought, wow, I'm having a date with that guy? And, well, wow, Well, when he shows up, I go, this isn't who I thought it was. And so we go out. He took me, all the students in a particular class he had to go out, and they had a full acre area out in the wild, so to speak, that they had to monitor for what kind of animals were on it, what was growing on it, everything I didn't know about. But we walked around all of that, and another friend of his that also had the same thing to do was there. We got back to the car, and it smelled bad in the car, but I didn't know it, and nobody said anything. So there was my husband, Don, and his friend, Lou, and we went back, and he dropped me off, and I thought, well, that's the end of that, And I had a date that night to go to a dance with another guy. And so I went to the dance, and when he brought me back, this other guy that I never saw again, everything was lit up. All of the dorms were lit up. There were cops all over the place. I mean, it was wild. And what it was they were upset about was that there was a skunk, and it was terrible. The smell was bad. And that it was, like 11 o'clock at night. Well, I went to bed, and obviously everything finally cleared up. And it was probably weeks before I learned that the smell in that car had been a skunk that Lou had trapped on his place. And when they got home, these cute boys that were such smarty pantses skinned out the skunk and took its smell things and dropped them out on the street so cars ran over them. And that was what caused this terrible smell. So I stayed at school 2 years. I decided that he was so interesting and so wonderful that I better take his suggestion that we get married. So at the end of my sophomore year, I didn't go back to school as a junior. And he was a grad student, and he had a job that summer. We got married at the end of school in June. And we went immediately, 2 days later, we flew to Alaska because he had a job with the federal government. They would hire students, like he was a fish and game major, to stay the summer out in the bays across Alaska and keep the fishermen from going too far upstream, because in the summer the salmon go upstream to spawn, and they back up, and a lot of them are waiting to go upstream. And so it makes too easy a place for fishermen to get to sop up the fish. So this kid stays out there for 2.5 months with a tent and a gun and a little boat to row out to the fishermen and say, "You can't be here." Well, he grew up in almost a 19th century situation. He grew up in northern Minnesota on a farm, what you would call a hardscrabble farm. It was his job every morning, along with his older brother, to milk the cows before he went to school and after he came home from school. There was no electricity inside until after 1940 in that part of the country. Like I say, it was like the 19th century in a sense. I mean, there were vehicles, but they used a horse to plow with. They did a lot of things like people had been doing for centuries before. So he was very down to earth and very knowledgeable, had an understanding of, can I say, the earth? I mean, I think today a lot of people don't really have any connection with it. I mean, they live someplace where everything is paved and they go up an elevator and they don't work with anything live. First thing we did after he graduated, got a job with a government job in Michigan. And so we moved to Michigan not about a year after we were married. And I worked for Dow Chemical Company as a secretary. I think I would be called an assistant now, to the director of personnel at Dow Chemical. And when he was transferred from there back to Idaho, I went to work for the government as a secretary. I had jobs I usually had a job until I had Duncan. And then I thought, I'm going to be a stay-at-home mother. I want to raise this kid. We were married 7 years before we had Duncan. And 3 years later, we had another son, Dean. So Duncan's brother's 3 years younger than he. I was delighted that I had 2 sons. I remembered what a jerk I was when I was growing up. I didn't want to have a daughter. And they were, well, I'm very proud of both of them because they have been good people. My favorite thing is that they've both found good women, and they both have been happily married, and what more can you ask? There's been so many inventions. Things have changed so dramatically, for instance, since when I left high school, we didn't have a TV set. That was 1954. There were TV sets. I had a rich uncle who had gotten a TV set actually right after the war, 1945. And everybody thought, wow, he's got a TV set. Now people have them in every room of the house. But but that was something amazing. And didn't we just progress to everything to where we have a basically TV set at our hand into being a computer or an iPad or a telephone that rules our life? Well, in a way, my business, antiquing, was a hobby. And as we've touched on, I'll say that often where the profit goes that an antique dealer may make is in the things he or she keeps instead of actually selling. Because in order to be an antique dealer, you have to love the junk you're buying. And when you love the junk you're buying, you think, wow, this one, I've never seen anything like it. I think I better put that in the dining room instead of taking it to a show. When the boys were both off to college, I started doing shows, big shows. So I did shows in Seattle, I did shows in Portland, I did shows in San Francisco. That was a lot of work, but you could sell as much in a 3-day show as you could sell in a month in a shop. My husband was very busy with his own job and business, but I got him interested in antique coffee grinders, of which there are an amazing variety. At this point in my life, I have been sending things to auction because I had way too much. When I stopped selling, there were things that were surplus to my needs, to say the least, that I couldn't let go of. Don wanted to get into sailing, so we took sailing lessons. And where we lived, there were a lot of sailors, and so, there were a lot of sailboats in the harbor, and so it wasn't hard to make an arrangement to be able to use a nice boat. And so we learned to sail, and we did all kinds of crazy things with it. I remember one time we were just sailing around the island with some friends, which would have been maybe a 2-hour outing. And we had to go around and under a bridge, and a new river came in right past the bridge, and it happened this day, and we were still pretty young at this whole sailing thing, but a race of sailboats came down the other stream and wanted to go past us. And all of a sudden, here were all these other sailboats coming, and we were not too good about how to get between them. And we made it, but it was scary. We had to do a turn like this. We had to do a circle. Don had to do it in order to wait a while so that there weren't so many other boats so close together coming in front of us. We went with another friend and the kids, and we camped near the beach on the inside, and there were bays that went way up inside, you know, from the ocean. So we had a boat, a rowboat or something, and one day we went way up, and the place was loaded with oysters. I mean, you could get out and pick up. As a matter of fact, the law was that you could take either 100 pounds of oysters per person back into the United States, or you could shuck them and take a gallon apiece of oysters. But while we were doing that, we saw something in the water that looked like a shirt floating, and we pulled up to it, and it was a body, a dead body. Immediately, we went back to shore, and we got the car and went into town to the police. And they were very interested immediately when Don told them we had found a body. And Lou, our friend, was, of course, with us. And I said, and so they wanted Don to go out with them to show them where the body was, which was quite a long way from where the police were. But of course, they could go by boat. So I said, can I come? And he said, you could come if you want, but you won't like it. And I thought, maybe I'll go back and take care of the kids. So they went and got the body, but they told us that 3 men had been river rafting above this channel that we had been in, and their boat had overturned, and they'd lost track of each other, and 2 of them walked out back the way they had come, but the third one never showed up. And that, of course, was the person we found. I've been to a lot of places, and I actually have been to quite a few of them with Duncan and Deborah, because Duncan is a very good travel planner, very good. But also, I've been to Machu Picchu, I've been to the Galapagos Islands, I've been to Dar es Salaam, and out across the Indian Ocean to the Seychelles Islands, which are south of India. I've made a number of trips to France. Bonjour was, you know, one of my major conversations. But I could go in a store and tell the proprietor that this thing that she had was beautiful and have very small conversations. I remember on the way down, that must have been the second or third day, if that it was 3 days that we fooled around getting down to Montpellier. So we'd been there a while, but we went in a restaurant that was up a long road high, and it was not a real touristy spot, so they didn't expect a lot of Americans in there, you know. And the waiter didn't speak English, and so he asked me, I ordered something from the menu, and he asked me in French if I wanted lamb or beef in it, and I didn't understand what he was asking me. And so after stumbling around a while, he left, and then he came back again with pieces of meat. And Germans in informal kind of restaurants would sit at a very long table, both sides of the table, and you just sit down and there's other people right by you. Well, Don didn't speak German, of course, but he ordered a beer, and when he got it, he looked at the guy across from him and he said, "Das ist gut Bier." And so the guy starts talking German to him, you know, blah, 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 blah. And Don says, whoa, 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 wait. Don was a member of a group that perfected, I'll say, a technique for tracking animals with a miniature tag. At the time, the tags that were put in animals were quite large, but they wanted to be able to track the fish with a miniature tag the size of a grain of rice. And that would be injected into the fingerling fish that were very small, and first they had to see if that would work and if the fish would survive that and so on, which of course they did. And then it required placing equipment that would recognize that the fish had the tag, and every tag of hundreds of thousands of tags was an individual tag that could be traced. When he retired at that time, he had the right to take that technology into the private sector. And so, two of the biologists that had long time employment with the federal government that had worked with Don decided to quit their cushy government jobs and go with this new company. So he started with 2 employees. And we had to refinance our house twice in order to raise enough money to keep the business going, because you don't just start out at the top of the pack ever. But we were lucky, and after about 3 years, we began to make a little bit of money. And eventually it got better. And then we were bought out by a smaller by a bigger company, but later than that, we got bought out by a really big company, and so did the one that had bought us. I had a wonderful husband. We had very good, wonderful things happen to us all our lives, including having 2 brilliant, handsome young men for sons.